Good afternoon. Welcome to the AIM Data Use webinar series. Today, before we get started with our presentation, we just want to remind everyone that you are muted by default and that if you want to ask questions, we encourage you to submit them anytime through the chat feature. Today we will have tools for communicating and operationalizing BLM's AIM strategy. And Justin Jimenez, Scott Miller, and Colin Brady will be presenting. And Alita, I, and Lauren and Alex will be facilitating. Take it away.
Thanks, Alita. 1 second and we should be going here. Lita, you able to, am I presenting?
You are good.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Alita. I really appreciate the AIM team providing this venue for people to share example data applications with AIM and other tools and our efforts to build a community of practice. Believe we get the honor of being one of the last presentations of this series, and want to thank all the previous presenters. It's been great series and I've really enjoyed listening to everybody's talks. As Alita said, we're going to talk to you about tools for communicating on operationalizing AIM. And it's probably fitting that we come last because we're going to be able to draw on some of the previous presentations that we saw. So as everybody, probably almost everybody on the call is aware by now that BLM's AIM strategy is designed to provide a standardized approach for measuring natural resource condition and trend on BLM public lands. It's a response to the fact that as an agency, we have multi-scale inventory assessment and monitoring needs, everything from national level inventories down to assessing the effectiveness of individual treatments. And that collectively, there's efficiencies to be gained through standardizing and coordinating our monitoring efforts both across these spatial scales and through time. When we think of AIM and the way that we accomplish this standardization, a lot of people will probably default and think about the principles of AIM. This idea that we have structured implementation and we're trying to ensure that the study design and data that's being collected is tied to monitoring objectives, that we're providing guidance on what to measure it and how to measure it in terms of core indicators, contingent indicators, for example, guidance on where and how to locate our sample sites, so appropriate designs and guidance on where to drive the truck to. This idea of data management and stewardship, and lastly, integration of remote sensing and how we obtain kind of spatially explicit resource information or use things like remote sensing to influence and inform our design process. So these are all critical components of any monitoring program and the bedrock of a lot of what we do with AIM. But one of the things we want to do is pivot a little bit from how we think about those AIM principles today and think about some other factors that are critical to successful monitoring programs that might not necessarily be the technical aspects of designing and implementing a program, but what we need to sustain it and ultimately communicate it. So we might think about things like a policy mandate of how does your monitoring fit within a broader policy or management framework within the agency. A lot of times policy is a great initiative to get people started and to motivate people and to sustain things through time. The idea of dedicated funding and vision. Consistent long-term monitoring requires funding, and it's best when it's not just figuring it out year after year, but you have a long-term plan for funding that ties to your vision. And lastly, this idea of coordination, that a lot of what we do in natural resource management, especially under BLM's multiple use mandate, requires shared responsibilities among programs, both within our agency and externally with our partners. So all of these components, I'd argue, policy mandate, funding, coordination, they share an underlying theme. And one of those underlying themes is communication and the importance of communication to sustaining your monitoring and ensuring that your monitoring efforts are used and go to their intended applications. We can think about communication in a lot of different ways, but one of them is, for example, for AIM, how does it fit within the larger BLM resource management framework? How does it relate to a lot of our standard business practices, whether it's FLIPMA or NEPA or land health assessments? Making sure your objectives for monitoring efforts are really clear. That's what we strive to achieve in our monitoring design worksheets and the broader idea of structured implementation, as well as communicating our results and how those results are applicable to various planning, restoration, reclamation, or permitting processes. With ultimately this idea that successful public land management is built upon networks and alliances and collaborations, as I said before, both internally and externally to achieve some common goal. And communication is really key to that. So the bottom line being that you can design, the best possible monitoring project and do everything to the best of your ability and collect great data. But if we're not effectively communicating it, it might not see the light of day and result in the desired applications. So what we wanted to talk with you today about is this idea of expanding the AIM principle of structured implementation to include tools for communicating AIM and how we operationalize AIM, and thinking about communication, for example, in a structured way. So we want to do this through a couple examples that we're going to highlight some tools that have been developed or some templates that we're going to showcase how they were used, but really our goal is to motivate you to come up with novel ways to communicate results of your efforts in different ways that you can use existing tools or templates or help us develop new ones. So we're going to highlight a couple examples. We're going to start generic or broad with the overall AIM fact sheet, and then talk about some state-specific implementation plans or fact sheets. And then we're going to pivot a little bit and focus on data applications, tools and templates for data applications, and highlight an example at a broad spatial scale from Idaho's statewide assessment, one from the Arctic District Field Office in Alaska focusing on energy development, and a template that we've been working on to assist with grazing permit renewals or just the broader land health assessment process. You've got three aquatics folks as your presenters today, so we are going to draw upon examples largely from streams and rivers. But I think a lot of what we're sharing is broadly applicable across the range of inventory assessment and monitoring activities that we do, especially applicable to AIM. So to start out, I wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of our AIM fact sheet, and that we have a new fact sheet that we did put out right before the pandemic. We've got stacks of them sitting at the NOC, and we would love to distribute them to you. I think Lauren Price is going to be following up with an effort to solicit from the state leads or that to get these sent out to the states. So want to make sure that you guys are aware. You can find this on the AIM website. And basically this is a simple 4-page kind of glossy document that gives a broad overview of what is AIM. I think it's a great tool for project planning, training new staff, briefing our partners or leadership, and providing them a high-level overview of, what is AIM? What are these idea of the principles of AIM? And what is structured implementation? And what are the standardized field methods? How did we do data stewardship and management, appropriate sample designs? So it goes through each of the core principles related to AIM. And then we highlight some example management questions and applications that are being addressed by AIM. And then on the back page, we highlight kind of contact information for different resources, lotic, lentic, and terrestrial, data availability, and some of our partners. And I think this back page is particularly powerful from the standpoint of where AIM is being done. And if you're briefing leadership or a partner to realize, hey, this isn't just something that you're asking to occur in my field office or our state, but hey, this is BLM wide. It involves multiple partners from the EPA, USGS, NRCS, Forest Service, numerous academic partners. And so we have a lot of support and momentum behind this, a lot of infrastructure, and it's not just a one-off effort, but a very coordinated effort and following in that idea of structured implementation. So that if you haven't seen the fact sheet, I encourage you to check it out. We'd like to get some out to you. So I think this is a great tool after your briefing leadership or that to leave on their desk and give them something to look at. And it's a really simple high-level overview that we can send out, printed on some nice card stock. And I think this turned out really, really nice, and really appreciate the assistance of the publishing staff at the NOC with helping us produce this. Justin, you want to take over?
Yes, thanks, Scott. This example is an aquatic game implementation summary. That's a template for each state that's available for use thanks to the NOC. We've used this in Utah as a communication tool to update BLM staff, partners, and leadership. It's a 2-page summary of the work we have done and our future plans and efforts. We try to share it frequently, like prior to the field season occurring, to let folks know what's going to be happening, and we also try to share it post to update them on what was accomplished. It gives us an opportunity to share our aquatic AIM efforts and accomplishments with others, including partners, other stakeholders, as well as leadership and other BLM staff. It's critical because a lot of the people are not aware of the work we're doing, and if we don't take the time and energy to share it, it's not likely to be used. That's what we've found through our experience. So we're trying to make sure all folks involved with our program or have an interest in it are aware, and this is one of the tools we use. The summary includes information being collected, how it is and can be used. Some examples are to assess RMP objectives, establish baseline conditions, identify stressors, conduct land health standards, and also assess some of our restoration effectiveness. We also use it to help build our program, the Aquatic Habitat Management Program in Utah. This is a key component. The Aquatic AIM is key to our program, and it's a very important component of it. It's basically what provides, there's funding that's provided to collect this information. So that means we're able to have staff, we're able to have folks on the ground at local offices collecting aquatic information, and a representation there and an ownership of the program. And it's great for other BLM personnel to get to work with and see these folks, collecting this great information and sharing it and being aware of it. We also use it a lot with our partners in developing partnerships. Our partners are really interested in this information, the results of it. One example where our partners have been very engaged and where we've identified some water quality concerns from collecting aquatic AIM data. Our partners at that point were interested in working together, such as the State of Utah Department of Environmental Quality, to do further monitoring to address water quality issues and then the extent of them. We also work with our partners such as Division of Wildlife Resources, where they have been really interested and engaged to use the chemical, physical, and biological condition information for aquatic species of concern, since most of their work is population monitoring. So we have basically coordinated to share all that information and to have a bigger picture approach to our management of those species of concern and have more information. The summary also includes the progress to date and future plans, which I mentioned earlier, and that's really important to keep managers and partners in the know, make them aware of progress, plans, and opportunities to work together. We include also some examples of data use and applications, which is very important. I mentioned some of these earlier again, so I'm not going to reiterate these, but that's critical to let folks know how this data can be used and how it should be applied, and for them to reach out to other key contacts to see how it is being used and what information is available. And with that, last but not least, is the key contacts identified there, letting folks know who the field office contacts or the district contacts are in regard to the program and information, so they can work with them directly and get that information. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. One thing I just want to point out is that at our last one of our last large in-person state leads meetings for AIM, we talked about this idea of developing implementation plans. And I think this demonstrates they don't need to be super complex. Some people have these little maps that just tell when different districts are going to be completed. COVID kind of derailed us, and we didn't get this updated to show that, hey, places like West Desert District has started their revisit sampling. Some people have tables that show different field offices by year, needed funding amounts. So they've been good tools in terms of helping see the long-term plan and the vision for implementation within a field office, district, or state. So those are just two examples of some templates that we've worked with the publishing shop at the NOC to develop these templates that are pretty easy for you all to take them, either to just use the AIM fact sheet or to develop one for your field office, district, or state, using kind of a standardized template and custom, but yet able to customize it to some of the needs and applications and messaging that you want to make and communicate to your leadership or other constituents. So now we want to pivot a little bit from talking about kind of what we're doing and where we're doing it and how we're doing it, and think about after a project is planned, implemented, data collected, now what? How do we optimize communication of AIM data, and especially its use to inform management? And want to get you all thinking about some of the ways that we could think about communication in a structured manner, and some of the key things of who's your audience. Are they a technical audience? Are they a non-technical audience? That's going to influence how you communicate different information. Are there internal or external factors to be aware of? Maybe you're working within a watershed and there's other landowners or permitted activities occurring not related to BLM, and building partnerships is going to be really important if we want to improve land health or watershed health of a particular area. I think these last two are really related, and one that we've struggled with at times of how to strike a balance between too much and too little information. When do we need to provide a lot of detail? People want to look under the hood, see the technical decisions that were made, versus they really want to get just the take-home messages. And that really comes back to who your target audience is. So we're going to go through 3 examples of various reporting tools or templates that are in various stages of development that might get you thinking about how you tell your story and communicate results from your monitoring efforts. And so to kick us off, we're going to have Justin talk to us about some of his experiences.
Thanks, Scott. And I guess one of the experiences, this comes from my experience in Utah, and then now Idaho is coming to fruition and going through some of this reporting of information. So just as Scott knows well, we have learned that dropping a 30 to 50 page report bomb is not the best way to communicate. Don't get me wrong, it's a great tool for our specialists who want to get under the hood and get some more detailed look and information. However, we've found that a 2 to 4 page executive summary is a much more concise tool to communicate with staff, partners, and leadership. This executive summary that's shown on the slide right now, it communicates or highlights in a concise and visual approach the information found within the 30 to 50 page report. It includes objectives such as determining baseline conditions, assessing the attainment of land health standards, identifying stressors and degraded conditions. One of the key aspects to the summary is that it highlights a summary of findings, which includes overall conditions that are found from the data collection and reporting, the greatest concerns, so what the stressors are there, and the amount of degraded conditions and what they are. This is important to share this information, as well as include in it the description of methods, because that's always one of the questions that comes up. So what are the number of sites that were looked at? What were the indicators collected? And the description of the benchmark, which always brings up questions. So it's very important to include that. We also have some key results that are found in the executive summary. And for example, the latest Idaho report was pretty interesting in that it showed that in Idaho, approximately 40% of the streams identified on the National Hydrography data set which is what we use to pull our probabilistic sample design from, there was only 40% of the streams identified as perennial were actually perennial. So this reflects some significant mapping errors and something that we are working with partners and will in the future to try to improve. Other results also include looking at the indicators in relationship to the land health standards that they're related to and the percent of stream area attaining benchmarks, basically a report card of conditions from the report to share in a brief and concise visual manner. Last but not least, the executive summary includes the next steps. This is critical because when this information is shared, people want to know what our plan is to address the results. That's the first question. Why is this? What are we doing about it, etc. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott and Colin, who will share some additional examples and discussion regarding addressing the results from reports like this.
Yeah, so that template that Justin just shared is a way, as we said, we're trying to take these, at the end there, I think it's really key that our plan is we'll have the link to where people can go and find the more detailed report if they want to look at all the details. And we've worked with the publishing shop at the NOC to come up with these, and they're more than willing to help get your reports into an executive summary like this. And I've actually expressed how much they like working on these types of projects and want to continue to work with us on them. As Justin said, we've had a couple instances of briefing leadership and found that these executive summaries are really useful. But that predictable question at the end is, okay, what are we going to do about this? To what extent of BLM permitted activities contributing? Now what? And so we need to ensure that we know now what, and that we have some approaches and tools for kind of step down monitoring or some of the causal assessments. So want to share with you now, that's an example of a state-based summary. So that executive summary was for a report that we put out for the state of Idaho, and now we're working with individual field offices within Idaho, but want to pivot and talk about two common permitted uses and how we're kind of stepping down monitoring and most importantly, communicating those efforts. And the first one is going to be from Colin Brady up in Alaska, and their effort to put together a story map and tell a story about a monitoring plan being developed to look at sustainability of energy development up on the Arctic coastal plain in Alaska.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so to continue building on what Scott and Justin have talked about is in Alaska, we wanted to create another avenue in which to show our LODIC AIM efforts. And I do also agree that technical reports are extremely important, but we wanted to create a more user-friendly, interactive way in which to summarize our story. And so we tried to do that through a story map. In this case, it's a story map showing our project in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska on the North Slope. And so I think story maps have the ability to really bring what you're doing into much more vivid context, whether it's through interactive maps and slideshows and just a lot more figures and photos that you don't have room for in these technical reports or 2 to 4 page summaries. And so a couple goals for this project in the NPRA were to establish quantitative baseline conditions for the chemical, physical, and biological attributes of BLM managed wadable streams and rivers. And then we also wanted to collect pre-disturbance data in watersheds with high potential for oil and gas development, which is kind of one of the main things that drove this project and led to data collection up there. And so one of the cool things I think that you can add in these story maps are these interactive maps. So this is in the methodology section, and the map accompanies how we selected our points and shows where our points were that we sampled. And you can enlarge this map and show whatever you want to show. And so these blue and red dots on the map are our aim points, and They're directly linked to Aquatic, and so you can click on these points and see the associated data with each of these points, and you can zoom in and scroll around and get more context, which you can't really do on a your traditional PDF document. And so these blue points are random points, and these red points were our targeted points that we identified within this particular watershed for oil and gas development. And so another cool thing I think that you can do in these story maps is you can add these slideshows and really highlight what you see in your field office or your project area. And I think we're all guilty, and I don't think we all truly are aware of the diversity of BLM managed lands throughout the Western United States. And this is a great way, I think, to highlight exactly some of that diversity that you see in your field office or project area, however big or small it is. And so with these slideshows, you can add different photos and kind of show the different types of diversity that you see, and add little blurbs just to kind of go into a little bit more detail and highlight those key geological or climatic factors that you might encounter. And so the North Slope is kind of a crazy, unique landscape. And at first you just think it's flat and there's no topography, but it's pretty unique with the type of streams and the amount of water and the connectivity of all these water bodies. So one of the main sections that we added in here is this application to land management and decision making. And this is kind of the meat of the story map, and really kind of gets into the so what of why we collected data, or the importance of collecting LODIC AIM data on the North Slope. And so in this section, we go into a little bit more detail and just show the study area, that northeastern portion of the MPRA where the majority and the current oil and gas development is happening. So we just added a couple maps and some more detail on exactly what's happening in these regions and what type of infrastructure is expected to be in there, and what infrastructure is currently there in regards to oil and gas development. You can add these additional locator maps with associated photos. You can also switch them around and have the photos as the main point and have a map on the left, and it's just a good way to further kind of drive what you want to show as unique in a particular study area. And so we added that in there to kind of highlight some of the unique characteristics of that Fish Creek watershed where this development is happening. And so the Arctic District Office developed this fisheries monitoring implementation plan, which was developed to better understand the relationship between the different oil and gas infrastructure and its potential effects on the biological, chemical, and physical processes of streams and rivers. And within this document, they developed a bunch of these conceptual models. This is just a modified conceptual one we added in here that really kind of drive each infrastructure and the potential direct and indirect effects on those different processes and how they may affect those. And so we added the slideshow in here to kind of highlight or show, well, what are some of those, what is the infrastructure we're talking about? And there's quite a few components that go into it, and it requires construction of gravel roads from the drilling pads to all the different areas throughout the development areas, and the permanent gravel roads, the dust associated with those. They cross streams and rivers. You have the pipelines. You have ice bridges that are part of the ice roads in the winter when they're moving equipment. And so we added just kind of a little blurb with each one of these photos to show, the potential impacts each of these different types of infrastructure may have on aquatic resources. And so it's just a great visual way to highlight, you know, exactly what you're dealing with on the landscape. And so, you know, kind of how do we monitor it? How do we monitor this? And then we dive in to kind of show what we're doing up there, and or how we are going to monitor it. And it's all tied back to those conceptual models and the record of decision and those mitigation measures and management policies that were put into place to reduce the likelihood of UUD with each one of these infrastructures that is associated with oil and gas as a permitted activity up there. And so we just go through the rest of the story map and give a couple examples, and we just choose 2 indicators that we are planning on using to monitor these streams and rivers and to ensure that these mitigation measures are indeed effective. And so we collected data pre-development, and we'll go back and collect data post-development at a handful of these stream reaches to assess whether or not there have been any impacts. And one of the indicators we chose is floodplain connectivity, given that we placed we sampled our stream reach locations directly below future planned road and pipeline crossings. And so this kind of goes into, I guess, my next thing. I just like to take a couple minutes and kind of describe, well, you know, what does this look like? What did it take to develop this? And it wasn't super easy. There's still a formal process that one has to go through in order to create this, but I do think it was beneficial. It does require going through the 1550-8 form process and getting the required signatures for those. This was developed as an internal product for BLM, and even so, it still required that 5050-8 process. And so, depending on if you're a state office employee or if you work in a field office, if you're a state office employee, then you go through Office of Communications for the state, and the deputy state director needs to sign off on it. And if you're in the field, then it goes to your Office of Communication within the district, and then your district manager. And so I think one of the unintended benefits of going through this process is upper level management in Alaska is now completely aware of what we've done on the North Slope in regards to LODIC AIM, and also what we're planning on doing up there. And so we hopefully laid a good foundation to, you know, once we go back up and collect this data post-development, that there's no surprises. And so I hope that we'll see more of these story maps come through in the future. I think they're a great tool that we can use to easily and visually show what we're doing.
Hey, thanks, Colin. So just want to close us out and highlight one final example of communicating AIM data to management applications. And one of the things I want to focus on is Tech Note 453 that came out this year, Guide to Using AIM Data in Land Health Evaluations. A couple different speakers have introduced this idea throughout our seminar series. I know Nika touched on it, and Cheryl and Cassie. And so appreciate the work that they highlighted. And so I'm going to take a slightly different angle today and not highlight a lot about the Tech Note itself, but one of the tools that we've been working to develop to help operationalize the use of this Tech Note and make your life a little bit easier in using AIM data and land health assessments. And one of those is through developing a template. Within the Tech Note, they basically outlined a process for preparing to conduct a land health assessment, the steps of integrating AIM data into a land health assessment, and then eventually getting to your land health evaluation and a determination, and implications for the NEPA process if that is applicable. And so one of the things that we've been doing is trying to develop a template for the process of gathering and formatting information for the evaluation process. Basically, how can we help you more easily work through that, and most importantly, at the end, have a way to document your findings. And we've had a tendency in the past, I'll admit, to try and solve issues from like a technological standpoint, but not knowing what the bullseye is that we're shooting for 100%. So where we are with this is that we've been working with numerous field offices that are using AIM data to conduct a land health assessment and evaluation, and figure out what are some of the standard types of information products that they need to plug into that evaluation report, specifically tables, maps, figures of data. And so I've been working with some of you to figure out, hey, can we develop a template? What is the information that is common to almost all of our land health assessments? So we've gotten a lot of good feedback from y'all and have a decent template developed. And now our next step is to work with some of the technical staff at the NOC and figure out, hey, what processes can we automate? How can we get it to the point that you can operate within a web map and get a report kind of auto-generated, or at least parts of it auto-generated for you? We know that finding data, organizing that data, a lot of times takes a lot more effort than actually using the data to inform some type of management application. So just want to give you a couple of examples of the type of information that's in that template. Folks can let me know if you have any comments, and then we will be providing some updates on our effort to automate a process like this. So one of the things I think that's in that Tech Note 453 that I think is so great is Appendix I, and that links the land health fundamentals to each of the state standards and how that links to actual AIM indicators. So Cheryl Newberry shared with us an example of watershed-based land health assessments that they're doing in the Rawlins field office. So that might be familiar to some of you if you saw her data use webinar. So I chose to focus on that example. So we have some text to go with this, some kind of standard text, but I'm just going to show some of the example tables. And the first one is just what are the utilized AIM indicators for the assessment? How do they relate to the indicators that are proposed in the published land health standards for Wyoming? How do they relate to the indicators and ultimately back to the standards? So this is basically a summary of what's available in that publication in Appendix I. The next thing as we go through those steps that the Tech Note proposes is the first step in any assessment is gathering available data. What data is available and what data is relevant to the standards that you're going to be assessing. As a lot of you know, we're developing AIM data portals that are kind of ArcGIS online type map interfaces that make it easy for people that either have a lot of GIS experience or are new to GIS to kind of get in there and see things spatially. So this is an example of how somebody can basically import the shapefile of, in this case, the watershed that they were looking at, find the available data that's in there and produce a map to show, hey, what data was available, how is it spatially distributed throughout, in this case, the Upper Platte River watershed. And then most importantly is this idea of applying benchmarks and summarizing results. And so this is an example table of all the AIM sample reaches that were available in that watershed. They then have selected indicators, as we said, relative to different standards. In this case, things like bank overhead cover, bank cover instability, percent fine sediment, and floodplain connectivity. In some cases, certain data wasn't available, and thus it isn't presented. One can just present the actual values, but if you've used the benchmark tool or any other ways to assign benchmarks, we can then start kind of color coding things in terms of what exhibited no deviation from our benchmarks, so no highlighting. The yellow's moderate deviation, and the orange is major departure, in this case from reference conditions or least disturbed conditions. And it gives you a quick idea of, hey, for what sites, what indicators were showing a departure and what degree of departure. So we have numerous tables that go through and do this for things like water quality, riparian, and different in-stream habitat indicators. Finally, and this is the stuff that's the easiest to automate in a way, is the importance of documentation. And there's a couple tables in there related to indicator metadata. So just a summary of what was the indicator. In this case, I'm showing a couple: water quality and bank stability and cover. A brief synopsis of the field methodology, the units and minimum and maximum possible values. And this just provides a quick reference for people if they're not sure, hey, what do they mean by total nitrogen or bank cover or macroinvertebrates? This provides a quick little lookup table. And lastly, we have tables produced for documenting our benchmarks. So we have things like the benchmark tools, but that can be pretty tedious or difficult and cumbersome to put in an actual evaluation report. And so we have some standardized tables, again, that has just the indicator, a description of the utilized benchmark, and what the source was for a given benchmark. So these are just a couple examples of some of the tables that are available in that land health assessment template that we're trying to standardize. And like I said, in the ideal world, we'd work to automate the production of some of this so that you guys can have a one-stop shop for getting information and getting it into a usable format for use in a land health assessment and evaluation. So to wrap things up, just want to reiterate this idea of, as technical specialists, I think we can get really wrapped around the axle of getting all of the science right behind our monitoring. And I think that's incredibly important. And that is where we need to start. So we have a firm foundation and we actually have something to communicate that we feel that we have confidence in. I think there's a lot of value, though, as well as broadening how we think about some of our AIM principles and thinking about communication in a structured way, of thinking about who your target audience is, this idea of internal and external factors to be aware of and how that can influence the story that you want to tell, or what content you want to have in there so that you anticipate people's concerns or fears or questions that they might have. And that often we need multiple lines of communication, just like we use multiple lines of information to make decisions. We're going to have varied audiences that require different types of tools. They can provide the broad overview, but then be through a fact sheet or a story map, but then be able to take a look at the more detailed report. And in a way, that's how you get people sucked in, if you will, with the glossy stuff, a lot of the eye candy, and then hey, I want to learn more. How did they do this? So we demonstrated that we have a couple tools available, things like fact sheets, the national level AIM fact sheet. These idea of, I really am a strong proponent for, especially at the state level and the state monitoring leads, this idea of developing a fact sheet of how AIM is being used in your state, district, or all the way down to the field office. It's a great communication tool, and we've gone on, don't take a lot of effort, and we've gotten a lot of mileage out of them. And as we explore ESRI more and more, and as we know in the federal government, we work a lot with ESRI-based products. The story maps are a great resource, as Colin was saying, to really bring your projects to life and get people to understand the where you're working, the types of issues that you're dealing with, and to really tell a story in a way that you just can't do with a page of words unless you're a really good writer. I'm really interested in developing this land health assessment template more as a tool to help you operationalize TechNote 453, and would love to work with some more people on their land health assessments to use that template and start working on, if we think we have a good product, start working to automate various components of populating that template. The NOC is a great resource, the National AIM team. We have a lot of great partners, and we are here to help you tell your story. But I also want to remind you that we're not the only ones. You're not alone, and there's great people within your state doing some really innovative stuff, that we've learned a lot from. So reach out to people within your state, ask them how they're using these various tools, how they're communicating, see what their ideas are. And if you find some stuff you're not hearing us talk about, please bring it to us and help stimulate ideas with us as well. So we wanted to wrap up. We've heard a lot of great presentations through this AIM Data Use webinar the last couple of months that is brought to you by COVID. and really want to encourage you, and hopefully you were inspired by a lot of talks, to think about how are you going to tell your story? You know, what ideas do you have? How can the AIM team help you? Or how can people within your state help tell the story? I've got contact information for the 3 presenters if you're interested in any of the specifics that we discussed. We are hoping to have a couple things approved by now and kind of signed off on, like Colin talked about with the story map, and we're on the brink of doing that. So we will definitely follow up with an email to you all with some links to the story map, to the executive summary for the Idaho report, and some of the other, the AIM fact sheet, for example, some of the other tools so that you can start using them and explore them for some of your communication needs and ideas. With that, just want to thank Justin and Colin for providing perspective from the field. Thank everybody for attending, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Scott, and yeah, thanks, Justin and Colin. Really great presentation. I really appreciate it. Just a reminder for attendees out there, if you do have questions for Scott and or Colin or Justin, you can type them up in the Q&A box at the top right of your team screen. Yeah, I don't think we have any questions lined up currently, so I may give some time for some folks to type in questions, and Lauren, can I hand it over to you to talk about SharePoint and some other fun updates?
Yeah, absolutely. If we could get that PowerPoint with the SharePoint URL up, that would be great. So I would like to plug the SharePoint first of all. I know we have a lot of places where we send you all, but once the Microsoft migration happened this year, this has kind of been like a big BLM collaborative space for our folks to go to learn more about what's going on with the program, to look at articles, webinars, videos, all kinds of fun stuff. We also have implemented a newsletter this year, so we are on our 2nd edition, which can be found at on the SharePoint. There's buttons everywhere. I might even just pull it up and show you guys, so I can give you a bit more time for questions potentially. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Great. So I know a lot of people hear me harp about the SharePoint, but if you go just to the homepage, we have our National AIM Newsletter September edition, where we're going to be telling you some updates for the next couple of months. We have an archive, we have a link to the data portal, some of our communications. We have our calendar where you can see upcoming events, tools, videos, to our Microsoft Stream channels. So I really encourage folks to look at the SharePoint when they get a chance.
But Lauren, I actually not
did it
able
go
to
away?
see your screen. Yeah, sorry.
It still didn't go on? Okay. Let's see. Okay, cool. So yeah.
That's good.
Great. Yeah, check out these links. The newsletter has updates, deadlines, articles, resources. Like I said, we'll have an archive. We also, I guess I'll go to it since we're talking about it right now, but we also have an AIM time commitment survey going on right now, which does close at the end of this week. We've gotten about 50 responses, which is awesome. I really appreciate any of y'all who have given your feedback. And I'm really hoping that we can get a few more because we're getting some really interesting feedback, and we're hoping to use that as communications to make the program more efficient and to help you all out more and help make your job more efficient when it comes to AIM. And that's my plug.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, we didn't have any questions from the attendees, so just a huge thank you. I really appreciate the presentation. Lots of really cool tools for communicating AIM, both for like upper level management, for NEPA documents. So I really appreciate that guy. I particularly love the story maps. I think they're really cool, good ways of presenting kind of a lot of complex data. So thanks again, everyone, for presenting, and thanks all the attendees for taking part.
Hey, thanks for coordinating, folks. Take care.
Take care.